Welcome to Assembly Calendar. I'm Mike Friesen. With us for our program today, Assemblyman Jim Hayes. Jim Hayes represents the 148th Assembly District in New York State. That includes parts of Erie County as well as part of Niagara County. We welcome especially you folks in Amherst as well as Pendleton and Martinsville for joining us for our program today. Jim Hayes, pleasure to have you with us.
It's great to be here, Mike.
You survived. You made it through the state budget debate here at the state capitol. We've got a lot to talk about as it pertains to the budget. Always a difficult, trying time here, some heavy lifting at the state capitol in Albany, if you will. And with this particular budget, some pretty good news. At least that's what all the media is reporting. An historic budget in that it spends less than the prior year's budget does. Also on time, something that Albany is not known for.
Right, and I think it goes back to Governor Cuomo's presentation on the budget back in the first week of February, and the budget that he took on the road around the state, including coming to my district in the town of Amherst at Damon College to take his case to the people about the need for cutting state spending, balancing a $10 billion deficit that he inherited from the previous years of overspending in the legislature, and doing it without any new taxes and any new debt. And he certainly accomplished those goals by forcing the legislature to bend to his will, to create a budget in open conference committees, as is required by the law, but unfortunately over the last several years had not been done, and to get it all put together on time and have it passed before the start of the new fiscal year on April 1st.
We did see a budget process that included those joint conference committees, members of the Assembly and Senate sitting together negotiating the budget at a public table, much like this. We saw the legislative budget hearings. We saw fairly regularly scheduled meetings between the legislative leaders and the governor. It seemed almost as if this was a budget that was put together the way budgets are supposed to be put together.
Right, and that's why, while I'm enthusiastic that it got done and it got done on time with those key factors we just mentioned, I don't think that there's reasons to be celebrating and, doing cartwheels in the middle of Main Street. This is the job of the legislature to do this most important task of creating a budget. There is a very strict timeline. The laws are very clear about how the legislature should move forward in doing this, and the dysfunction that has happened in previous years has been something I have stood on the floor of the State Assembly as the ranking member of the Ways and Means Committee and railed against and criticized, because people back home have said over and over again, Jim, it is a dysfunctional situation. Why can't the legislature do its job and get a budget passed on time and set the stage and the roadway for what New York State taxpayers can afford? It's a start. The process worked this year, but remember, it was because Governor Cuomo was right on top of it every single day. He's a very strong governor, strong executive, and I welcome that to the process, but it's only really the beginning. It's only the start of cleaning up the mess that has occurred over the last decade here in Albany of overtaxing, overspending. And I'm hopeful that this sets the stage for future budgets to really turn the state around and help us get the taxes down and bring the jobs back.
And I would suppose the other reason not to be dancing in the streets, to use your own idea there, is that this is a budget, it is described as historic because it spends less. So there are cuts in this budget, and there are various constituencies across New York State that are impacted in a negative sense by those budget cutbacks. Let's go to the floor of the Assembly and look at some of that debate that you led as the ranking minority member on the Assembly Ways and Means Committee, and then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more about that impact, especially on the people in Erie and Niagara counties.
For the first time in my legislative career in this chamber, we finally have put the brakes to the runaway train of state spending increases and state tax hikes that have had devastating effects on growth, opportunity, and job creation in the state of New York. Mr. Farrell reminds us that the Speaker characterized this budget as sobering. I would characterize it as somber. Somber because the state still has its back to the wall, a wall that was built by years of spending and borrowing and taxing beyond our means, and beyond the means of what our families and businesses in New York could afford. So we move forward with great hope and with some satisfaction that this legislature is passing a budget that is on time and resonates with the calls for responsibility and restraint that have for many years come from this side of the aisle. This budget must not be an end point. It must be the start of a New York State journey on the road of responsibility, reform, and fiscal restraint, so that we can once again allow the private sector to create economic opportunity and an environment in our state that will create jobs and economic hope for our people. I realize this is not an easy vote for any member of this chamber here tonight and tomorrow. And for that reason, I ask you, colleagues, to very carefully consider your vote and join me in voting in the affirmative. Thank you.
Let's talk a little bit now about the impact of this budget on the people of the state of New York. Is this something that the state can live with?
I believe so, and by closing a $10 billion deficit without new taxes and without new borrowing, it sets the stage to do the real work next year and the year after, and that is to get taxes cut so that we can bring jobs back to Western New York in particular. We know that over the years that the state has raised taxes and fees and gone after people's pocketbook and wallet in any way, shape, or form they could. That has to all be reversed if we expect to see job creation and private sector growth. We talk a lot about our young people. We talk a lot about education and the tremendous amount of money that we spend every year educating our children, only to find them to be chief among our exports to other states as they go off looking for jobs and economic opportunity elsewhere. They leave. We now have stabilized the patient. The bleeding hopefully has stopped. It's now time to revive the patient and get them up and healthy and moving around so that we can see these young people particularly come back and take jobs. You know, the census data was released in the past week or so, and in my assembly district alone, and I think it was mirrored across Western New York, the largest group of people who left were in that very critical age group of 25 to 40, people who were really starting their careers or coming into their maturity of their careers, had to go other places. And when you remove that slice of the population from any community, you lose a tremendous amount. And so I hope that this budget is something that sets the stage for future tax cuts, future economic growth and stimulus, so that we can see the private sector create those jobs we want our kids to come back and take.
Looking ahead to cutting taxes, though, that's not going to be an easy move to make, because even during this debate, even though you had that strong governor who was making the case for why this budget had to be the way it is, you still had members from the other side of the aisle standing up saying, I can't believe that we're making these cuts at a time when we are not extending the tax, the so-called millionaire's tax, for example. I mean, there still is that philosophy very strong in the Assembly.
Well, what will happen is the budget will be right-sized to what taxpayers can afford, and then as the economy improves, and as things happen cyclically in the economy, as we know they will, we had a jobs report nationally this past Friday that said we're making incremental progress in the private sector on creating jobs. As the economy improves, New York will be set up to take advantage of that improvement and do the things that are necessary to create jobs. I think next up for Governor Cuomo and the legislature is to really focus on paying down debt as well. Get that debt paid down so that we don't continually have money siphoned off from critical services going simply to pay interest payments on ever-growing debt. That's something that the country has to worry about as well.
When there's a budget bill, the budget is actually several different bills, and there's one for the debt payment. There were some pretty scary figures used. The total that's rung up on the state's credit card, there's some pretty big numbers there.
There sure are. We have one of the highest per capita state debts of any state in the nation, and that's just a drag on future economic growth and also a drag on our ability to provide the critical services, education, health care, police protection that people look to state government to provide. So hopefully this sets the stage for a good year of living within our means, and then creates a new platform from which to build next year.
It's just like any household that's let its credit card get away from them. What a burden, what a drag it can be to get out from under that. We want to show a photo now, and I'll let Jim Hayes tell us a little bit about this. We caught up with you meeting with a school group out in one of the hallways here at the state capitol, and here's the photo, and this was a school for the deaf.
That's right. One of the joys of being in the legislature and seeing constituents come to visit where state government works and passes laws is the chance to meet constituents right here in Albany. And this is students and faculty members from St. Mary's School for the Deaf in Buffalo, which is a school that is totally dedicated to teaching the blind and the deaf and do tremendous work. As a personal aside, my grandfather, my father's father, Francis Hayes, was a graduate of that school, having been made profoundly deaf during his youth when he contracted scarlet fever and was left profoundly deaf for the rest of his life, communicating only in sign language. And so as I grew up in a household where we had deaf grandparents, I learned American Sign Language so I could communicate with them. And it was a real joy to be able to greet the students and the faculty members from St. Mary's to talk about how they could interact in the budget process as they were lobbying to make sure that their schools continued to get the state aid that they needed to operate.
I heard about that give and take between you and the students and the people from the school, and the word that was used for me is fluent. I mean, you really kind of nailed that whole interaction, and what a thrill that must have been for them to come to Albany and meet with so many different state legislators and then find one who could speak their language.
It was a great experience, and the letter I was caught on the photo using as the letter L. I was asking the young man if he's going to grow up to be a lawyer and maybe run for state office, but I told him not to do it too soon, to wait until I was finished serving the community, and we had a very, very good exchange.
And those schools are described in Albany parlance as 4201 schools. They were able to get some restoration to funding from Albany as part of the final negotiations of this budget, right?
That's right, recognizing the importance of making sure that students who have handicaps get what they need to complete their education.
In our last couple minutes, one of the main thrusts of your budget debate and many in the Western New York delegation here at the state capitol was to push for what's become known here as the UB 2020 program, giving the University of Buffalo some autonomy in things such as putting together their tuition rates.
Within hours of passage of the state budget, I joined my colleagues in the Western New York delegation to meet with Howard Glazer, the governor's chief director of state operations, and we had pushed very hard to get the UB 2020 program contained in the budget so that we could move forward on it. That was not possible due to some of the opposition that remains from downstate members of the Assembly, but the governor has personally committed to put together a task force and to convene a meeting very soon so that he can also use that strong executive power to try to overcome what remains to be very limited objection to UB 2020 so that we can get that passed as a standalone bill in the session before it ends in June. So I'm going to continue to redouble my efforts to work with the delegation to make sure UB 2020 becomes a reality. We're
again, really short on time, but the whole premise, for the way it's been explained to me about UB 2020 is that it will do good things for the economy and help with budgetary concerns.
That's right. It won't send any more money. It will create an opportunity for UB to decide how to spend and allocate those funds, work with the private sector to create jobs and synergies that will help bring more students, more quality faculty members, and economic development to Western New York.
If you folks watching want to reach out to your state representative, maybe ask some questions about the impact of this finalized state budget on yourself or your family, you can do so by reaching Jim Hayes at his office in Williamsville. Call 634-1895 or send an email to the address you see right there on the bottom of the screen. Jim Hayes, thank you again for joining us. We'll, I'm sure, be talking more about the impact of this budget as weeks continue on here at the state capitol and what more is to come for the legislature this session. We hope you folks will join us for our next edition of Assembly Calendar.